Hey, good morning. For all of you that are just joining us, I'm glad that you made the time to catch us here for week 5 of our fall webinar series. My name is CC Williams. I'm the Lifelong Learning Coordinator here for the City of Rock Hill Parks, Recreation, and Tourism Department. While we're waiting on everybody to kind of get logged in and settled here, if you would put your name in the chat function, everyone should have access to that. And if you'd put your first and last name in there, and you can share that with everybody. There's a function there for you to share that with everybody. You may be able to see that one of your friends is logged on, and you can chat with them about the presentation afterwards. And it does help us kind of keep track of who's here as well. So we usually get started about 2 minutes after the hour. So we'll give everybody a few more minutes to get logged in. So while we're waiting the last few minutes here, our presenter, Sam McGregor, has provided a couple of questions here for us as we're waiting. So I'm going to go ahead and put those up. You're going to be able to answer these poll questions either by tapping your smartphone or tablet or clicking them with your mouse on your computer. So something new for us. I hope you enjoy this. So here's 2 poll questions for you to respond to that are both about our presentation today. If y'all are just joining us, you've got some poll questions you can respond to as we're waiting here. And if you haven't put your name in the chat box, we'd appreciate you doing that. Let us know that you're here. First and last name would be great. Again, my name's CC Williams. If we haven't met, I'm the Lifelong Learning Coordinator for the City of Rock Hill Parks, Recreation, and Tourism Department. Lots of answers coming in. That's awesome on the polls. Thank you for participating. We're going to leave this poll question up and we'll let everybody have a few more minutes to read those and respond. I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Ms. Jody Steele to kick us off for today.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the 5th Listen and Learn session. My name is Jody Steele. I am a volunteer committee member for lifelong learning at Rock Hill, where curiosity never retires. Our remaining topics for the Fall 2020 webinar series are how to buy a car, will the real Daniel Webster please stand up, and an actor of age. We hope you are enjoying the variety of topics provided along with our knowledgeable presenters. Thank you for your participation and for telling your friends about lifelong learning at Rock Hill by directing them to the City of Rock Hill Lifelong Learning website. Many of our members were intrigued with Professor Katerina Moyan's introduction of Winthrop University's common book, The Girl with Seven Names, during the webinar on October 23rd. Listeners were fascinated with Hyun Lee's story of her escape from North Korea, the frightening near-death experiences that she had over a period of 10 years, the courage and quick thinking that she displayed so many times. Many of you shared that you started reading the book immediately. We are fortunate
Seems like we may have had a slight technical problem there. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Jan Phillips, and she can introduce our speaker for today.
Good morning. I met our speaker, Dr. Sam McGregor, several years ago when he spoke to a group of friends who had heard about the very meaningful walking trail that members of Allison Creek Presbyterian Church had created there. Dr. McGregor took us on a tour of the church. He showed us the slave section upstairs in the church with seats tilted forward to keep the slaves away. We walked the path called Common Ground and learned the history of the slaves and the free men who were buried there in the woods without markers. He introduced us to the connection their church has made with the descendants of those who fled to Liberia fearing the Ku Klux Klan. Dr. McGregor has been a senior minister at Allison Creek Presbyterian Church in the Lake Wylie area for over 20 years. He's a graduate of Clemson University and holds a Master of Divinity degree and a doctorate in the ministry degree from Columbia Theological Seminary. He's a native of Hopkins, South Carolina, where he was one of the first students to attend integrated schools there. Sam is married to Catherine and is the father of 3 young adults. Please join me in welcoming Sam McGregor, who will share his church's fascinating story with us today.
Thank you very much for allowing me to share with you today as I begin to share my screen and get to share with you what I think is a very amazing story that unfortunately not very many people know about, but that I think is a story which is very powerful and very relevant today and is very transformative today. And I think you'll be amazed at how much information that I'm able to share about this story, which is another thing that makes it very much unique. So it is great to be here, and I appreciate the marvelous welcome and preparation that Jan and Cece and Jody and Dick have provided today. So like they have shared, I'm pastor at Allison Creek Presbyterian Church, which is on Highway 274 up towards Lake Wylie, between Newport and Lake Wylie. And the church was begun in 1854. And as you know, this area was very much a rural area until fairly recently, in the last 3 or 4 decades. So when I arrived, this was the plaque that greeted as you walked in the door, and it recognizes the area, the Allison family that lived in this area, and this plaque recognizes William Barry Allison. He was a colonel in the Southern Confederate Army, and his wife Susan. Susan's family donated the land to start this church. But one of the things you'll notice is there are a couple of symbols on this plaque, and of course those being Confederate flags. And you'll also notice that the plaque was erected in 1952, which you may know there are 2 periods of Southern history where where Confederate memorial plaques or monuments were erected, and that is early 1900s and around 1950s and 1960s. So the early 1900s, of course, is around Jim Crow, and then the 50s and 60s is around period of civil rights recognition. So in 1954, the Presbyterian Church U.S., which is the denomination that birthed this this congregation, the PCUS, the Presbyterian Church U.S., was actually formed after the Civil War because the Northern and the Southern Presbyterian churches disagreed about about slavery, with the Northern Presbyterian Church deciding that slavery was wrong, whereas the Southern Presbyterian Church, led by Reverend Thornwell and others, declared that slavery was a biblical institution and therefore to be defended. And so, so this denomination was actually begun around the defense of slavery. In 1954, the PCUS voted at our General Assembly, our National Assembly, to no longer no longer be a segregated denomination and instead to be a integrated denomination. A couple of months after that General Assembly meeting, the session here at Allison Creek met, and you see the minutes of that meeting, which says, after a short discussion, the session voted unanimously in favor of and declared Allison Creek Presbyterian Church a segregated church, which of course means a whites-only church. So this is the cemetery that you see beside the church, and includes soldiers from Confederate Army. You'll see some bronze plaques out there. You can see one of those couple of those bronze plaques in the center of this picture. Includes people that have led Allison Creek all through the years, from its original founding up until today. So a cemetery that we call the Allison Creek Cemetery, which of course has great pride in the folks that are buried out there. In the woods, the cemetery that you don't see from the road is the Clay Hill graveyard or cemetery, and this is the cemetery that when I arrived, I was told that there was a slave cemetery out in the woods, and a man named George Meyer, who is a member of this congregation and lives in this area, began a process of restoring it and drawing attention to it. And what we initially thought was just a few graves, we discovered in walking the grounds and then doing some other excavation, discovered that there are 300 grave sites with 14 markers. You'll see there a fleur-de-lis on, we went through and we have marked all the 300 grave sites, including with a fleur-de-lis, which is a symbol of the Trinity. However, after using the fleur-de-lis, because we thought that would be a good symbol, we did discover that that was actually a symbol that was used engraved upon some enslaved people. So even when you try to do what's right, sometimes you discover things aren't always so clear cut. So we began to explore about who the people are that are buried at Clay Hill. And this area was the locations for Hill's Iron Works, which was begun in the 1700s, and Hill came over from Ireland and got grants from the government to open up his iron works. and he mined iron ore from Nanny's Mountain, which is located right next to us here at Allison Creek. And he made artillery during the Revolutionary War. And beyond that, they made farm implements for farmers in the area. And so nearby you had the Hills plantation, and it covered 20 to 25,000 acres of property. And that's because to run an ironworks, you need three important items. You need iron ore, which they got out of Nanny's Mountain. You need coal, which the reason why they ended up acquiring close to 25 acres of property was because they burned the wood for coal. And the third thing you need are laborers. And of course, that meant enslaved African Americans. And so the tombstone that you're looking at, Dorcas Hill, Dorcas is most likely, we assume, to be a blood relative of William Hill, that was the second generation of starting Hill's ironworks, and or the first generation was her presumed father. And Dorcas and her son Elias, their freedom was purchased in 1840 by Dorcas's husband, who we don't know anything about him. We assume he was probably African, and he was able to purchase his own freedom for $150, and then purchased Dorcas's freedom. And as part of the deal for purchases Dorcas's freedom, her son Elias was thrown in on the bargain. And you'll hear about Elias in a little bit, about why he was perceived to be so inexpensive, but yet very much the opposite of that. So we got two historical markers that were erected with the help of the Culture and Heritage Museum and Michael Scoggins, who was very important and provided tremendous information to us. And so this part of the historical marker recognizes the church's history, and coming out of Bethel and Ebenezer churches, Bethel to the north of us in Lake Wiley, and Ebenezer in Rock Hill. Interesting thing about J.R. Baird, the first pastor, he ends up being part of the group of Confederates that after the Civil War flee to Brazil, where they set up a community in Brazil. If you Google Confederates in Brazil, you'll find this amazing story of this community of former Confederates who celebrate Southern heritage while they're speaking Portuguese, and Baird was their first pastor in Brazil. The next slide is the backside of that historical marker here, and it recognizes our connection to the three churches that are closest to us, which are Union Baptist, Liberty Hill, AME Zion, and New Home AME Zion churches, which were churches that were formed by formerly enslaved folks that after the Civil War left this church, where they were many were baptized members of Allison Creek, sat in the balcony, which we still use today. And like was mentioned in my presentation, the pews in the balcony are the original pews that were built by enslaved African Americans. And so this has led to some amazing work and partnership with these with the three congregations that we do several things with together. And it's been a real blessing, I think, to all of us. So the other historical marker that we have erected draws attention to Elias Hill, and that's where I'm going to focus my attention today. So, like I shared, Elias Hill was born enslaved, but was freed in 1840, and Elias developed either polio or muscular dystrophy. I'm going to assume polio. But after his freedom, again, that was purchased by his dad, Elias becomes a Baptist minister, he becomes a school teacher, and becomes a civil rights leader, and becomes head of the Union League. Now, remind of his body was so deformed from the polio that he was not able to walk. He had to be carried around, and his front teeth had to be punched out so that people could understand what he was saying. But he ends up being described as the most remarkable man of South Carolina, and becomes this incredible civil rights leader. He ends up buying 40 acres of property next to Allison Creek. Well, because of being a civil rights leader, and he began communicating with his representative in the U.S. Congress, a man named Wallace, who's buried in York. And Elias began communicating to Representative Wallace and others about what was happening post-Civil War, which is the rise of the Ku Klux Klan in this area. And I will argue that the real birthplace of the KKK was right here in York County. And on top of that, the theological foundation for the KKK was the Presbyterian churches here in York County, which includes our church and some other Presbyterian churches that some of you may be members of today, like Beersheba and First Presbyterian in Rock Hill. So in 1871, in May of 1871, the KKK seeks out Elias Hill. The leader of the Klan was none other than Dr. Rufus Bratton. Yes, Bratton of Brattonsville. So today on McConnell's Highway, you can see his former house on the backside of what is Brattonsville's property. Rufus Bratton was a well-known doctor at the time, but he was also the leader of the Klan. And so, so in May of 1871, in a very horrific night, May 5th, 1871, the Klan came and terrorized Elias Hill and his sister-in-law, Harriet Simrell, and they demanded that Elias renounce his affiliation with the Republican Party and to speak in favor of the Klan and what they were doing. And so the Klan, their target, their focus was on voter suppression. They were trying to get Blacks to people of color to renounce Republicanism. They were trying to intimidate whites to not vote if they were Republican. So after that horrific night, the federal troops are called here to York County under Ulysses S. Grant. So the federal troops come in, and it ends up just being about 90 federal troops because Grant did not want to have too large of a federal troop presence in the county. So ends up the federal troops take over the Rose Hotel in downtown York, which is still there. It's an apartment building today. And a commission was appointed by the U.S. Congress. And there were trials set up in Columbia and here in York against the Klan and their activities at that time. Ends up there were about 700 Klansmen that were indicted, and about 300 were found guilty. And then only about 60 were sent to prison in Albany, New York. And so Elias Hill and his sister-in-law, Harriet Simmerl, testified at the Rose Hotel against the Klansmen. So just imagine what it's like to be a person of color and testifying against the Klan. And one of the things that Elias, in his testimony, he identified two folks in his testimony, one of which is somebody that he understood would come to his defense, a white landowner here in this area. And then when the Klan came in, Elias sent word to this white landowner nearby with the last name Bigger, asking for him to come and help him out. And no response came back from Bigger. And the assumption is that the white landowners that around this area that Elias thought would come to his defense were in fact either Klansmen themselves or certainly supportive of the Klan. The two individuals that Elias mentions and identifies by name in his testimony, one of which is an elder here at was an elder here at Allison Creek Presbyterian, and the other one that's identified is was a member here at Allison Creek Presbyterian. So Bratton, he ends up fleeing to Canada and ends up being tracked down by the U.S. Marshals. And he initially resisted and was made a hero. Canada had only been a country for a couple of years, and the Canadians thought this was intrusion into their new country for the Americans to come in and try to extradite one of their citizens. And so the U.S. Marshals end up clandestinely coming in and capturing him, chloroforming him, and transporting him back to York County, which ended up being this major international scandal that the American U.S. Marshals did this. Well, Bratton ends up having lots of supporters here in York County, and so they make arrangements for him to flee again, and he ends up fleeing back to Canada. The town in Canada where he ended up living and becoming a doctor, they wanted to erect a historical marker to honor Bratton for standing up to the U.S. because this was seen as a very proud moment in Canada's history. But then when the Canadians started inquiring about Bratton's history and discovering that he fled there because he was a member of the Klan, they kind of backed away from wanting to erect the historical marker. Many of the Klansmen that were here, many of the families ended up fleeing to Arkansas. They fled out west, and Arkansas is where they ended up. And in the minutes of Allison Creek Presbyterian Church, there are at least 3 church families that in our minutes, their memberships were transferred to Arkansas, which the assumption is therefore they were Klan families that were fleeing. Beersheba Presbyterian, which is out on the western edge of York County, they had to stop worship services because so many church families left to flee to Arkansas and elsewhere. Also, the organizing pastor of First Presbyterian in Rock Hill, you'll see his name on the historical marker right in front of the church. He came and tried to intimidate Elias and others from testifying against the Klan, saying that the Klansmen were good Christian men and not to speak harshly of them. So after all that, Elias, being very disappointed at what he felt like was the white people that let him down and the terrorism that he was experiencing, he felt like it was impossible for African Americans to live in York County. And so he ends up leading a migration of 166 to Liberia in Africa. And we actually had the manifesto of the Edith Rose ship that they boarded out of Portsmouth, Virginia, and sailed for 38 days to Liberia. And you can find all of this information that I'm sharing, you can find on our church's website, including the manifesto, which lists all the names of the folks that were that went to Liberia. And at the end, close to about 20,000 people that immigrated to Liberia from the U.S. That was formed through something called the American Colonization Society, which was formed in 1816 to fund African Americans to colonize what would become the country of Liberia. So the marker on the backside of the marker that mentions Elias Hill mentions about the migration to Liberia. This is the first historical marker in the state of South Carolina to mention the Ku Klux Klan. It is the first historical marker to acknowledge the Reconstruction here in York County, and so we feel like that's pretty important to acknowledge that. So Elias Hill gets to Liberia, and within 3 to 4 months contracts malaria and dies. Some of the folks end up immigrating back to the U.S. because conditions are very harsh. A large percentage of folks contract malaria and die. And then some folks stick it out. And so what you have here is the picture of Solomon Hill and Jean Moore. They were born here in York County and were actually part of the ones that met with local white landowners to try to establish a sense of peace with their family and the white landowners in the area, who ended up turning their backs on the African Americans like Elias and Solomon Hill and Jean Moore. So it ends up that Solomon Hill and Jean Moore actually become basically millionaires in Liberia. They become the richest men in Liberia by growing coffee and ginger and become merchants. In fact, Solomon Hill's home in Monrovia was the first U.S. embassy in Liberia. The sad part of this story is that the African Americans who immigrated to Liberia, and they are now called Americo-Liberians, they set up a system in which the Americo-Liberians, or the formerly African Americans, are paid 50 cents a day for labor, and the native Africans are only paid 25 cents a day. They came with cannons, and many describe what they saw in Liberia as the same types of plantations that were seen in the South. And so one of the intriguing stories, I think, of this cycle is my ancestry is Scotch-Irish, and my ancestors immigrated from Scotland to Ireland, and then migrated from Ireland to the U.S. because they felt like they were being persecuted by the English, and then end up setting up a system where they oppress African Americans here in this country. My ancestors were slave owners, owners of enslaved, and then those enslaved African Americans end up going to Liberia, where the same system is unfortunately set up in Liberia, and that impacts the country of Liberia today, unfortunately. Three years ago, a group of us were able to travel to Liberia. And so you see a group shot. There are 5 of us from Allison Creek, plus native folks from Liberia. And we were blessed to have Peter Breeze, who is our contact in Liberia, be our guide. And one of the things that is truly fascinating about Liberia is how many place names have been adopted from the US. And so you will notice that we are standing in front of the sign that says South Carolina Road. And so the cemetery, which I'll show you in a little bit, in Arlington, Liberia, is on South Carolina Road. We also saw York Estates, and we also saw a store that I was very excited to see. Being a graduate of Clemson University, we saw a Clemson medicine shop and a Clemson hardware store. And so that is me standing up there in front of the Clemson medicine store in a very dusty town in Liberia. So the cemetery, we were able to find the gravestones. Elias Hill did not have a gravestone, which was a source of great sadness for us, but June Moore and Solomon Hill did. And so you'll see on June Moore's tombstone there, you'll see written on there, born in South Carolina, and then immigrated to Liberia, and his birth and his death. June Moore ended up coming back to the U.S. in 1896. He came to York County. He was interviewed by the York Inquirer newspaper, and so a lot of the information that I've shared comes out of that article, and then the specifics on the torture that Elias Hill took under the hands of the Klansmen, that comes out of his testimony at the Rose Hotel, which again, both of those items, source documents, can be found on our church website. We were able to meet with descendants of June Moore and Solomon Hill, and just this gentleman, Alfred Hill, is a direct descendant from both June Moore and Solomon Hill. And so I have a book that I was able to share with them that includes the pictures of his ancestors that he had never seen before, and to share about this story about Elias and his courage that he had never ever heard before. And so it was a very powerful moment to be able to share that with them, and the stories of their ancestors that they had not heard before. So then we pull back to here at Allison Creek and how this story has impacted us. And so the Clay Hill, the cemetery, has become center of redeveloping the property here. We're blessed with 23 acres of property, which we now call common ground, and it is open to all, and that includes soccer fields and prayer chapel, which you see in the distance. And again, we're right on the highway. And so that's a close-up of the prayer chapel, which is built as a replica of the sanctuary. How we acquired that is a pretty amazing story in itself. It was an old playhouse that we came in that was built by a member of the church for his grandchild that we ended up getting access to, and the steeple was donated by somebody, and then the woods around the cemetery, we have converted into walking trails. And so you're going to see some of the different prayer stations that we have along the trail. So initially a Boy Scout project, but we have a group of volunteers that come out every week and do work on the trails and upkeep of the property. And so you'll see, so that was the Bell Station. You'll see the Love Thy Neighbor, which is, of course, a biblical imperative. And so that prayer station, we've broken that down into what does it mean to love your neighbor. And so we've broken that down into some different categories of what we think that means to truly love your neighbor, which you'll see there. another one of the prayer stations, the grateful prayer stations, where, you know, the grounds are always open, sun up to sundown. Come out and enjoy the grounds, walk the trails, and we have a waterfall that our volunteers built. It's pretty amazing, I think. Architectural accomplishment in building this waterfall that is in the woods next to the church and along the trails. And then the last slide I'm going to show you is we were blessed to be able to share this story through a festival which we hosted twice, the Let the Say Amen Festival. And we dedicated a marker at the festival the first time we did it, and we were able to be in contact with the descendants of the Hills who were able to come out and came from as far as Philadelphia and Virginia to come to the event. And we had reenactors portray the story, and in the story we had the last character being Solomon Hill. And when we did it the first year, the person who was reenacting the story of Solomon Hill was his great grandson, who lives in Philadelphia and works for American Airlines, and was able to work out his schedule to be able to be here and be a part of that. And so you see there Reverend Peter Breeze from Liberia blessing that historical marker, which was a very powerful experience. And so we don't do the festival anymore, but we have moved into the next stage of telling the story through events like what I'm just doing. Like I said, you can go on our website, our church's website, and see the information that I have shared, as well as some videos that we have produced of reenactors retelling the story, as well as ETV, South Carolina ETV did a story on this a couple years ago, and so their segment is on there as well. The last thing I'll do, I'm going to give a plug for a book which is about to come out, and it is written by Scott Ferris, who is, and that's F-A-R-R-I-S. He is a New York Times bestselling author, and he has written a book that is coming out about this story. It's called Freedom on Trial: The First Post-Civil War Battle Over Civil Rights and Voter Suppression. And Scott tells this story and connects it to the wider story of the oppression and the Klan in South Carolina, including the story of Rufus Bratton and Jim Williams, who was lynched, and then Wade Hampton, who was governor at the time, and his involvement. And Scott's book is available on Amazon for pre-order. And Scott is the great grandson of one of the Klansmen that fled York County and settled in Arkansas. And so Scott's written this book to tell this story, which I think I've been able to read the book prior to publication, and it's an important book to read to understand why things are the way they are in South Carolina and in the South and in the United States concerning the disadvantages that exist towards people of color, and what voter suppression looks like, and why we need to fight against voter suppression, because of course the voter suppression by the Klan in the 1870s leads to Jim Crow, and you know, Reconstruction, what could have been was destroyed because of the weakness of the federal government caving into white suppression, voter suppression, white supremacy, and why it's important to learn this history now, so that we stand up against attempts of white supremacy and voter suppression now. Two things that I personally have learned from this story, and that is to be honest with your history. We don't need to sugarcoat our history. We don't need to pretend things weren't as they were. And the second thing is to don't worship your history, but try to understand it. History is not to call us back to do something the same way again. You know, we say sometimes we've never done it that way before, but history can help us to interpret the future. So by understanding our history, we can better understand who we are today. So that is where I will stop, and I will stop sharing my screen, and we'll go back to other folks now.
Great. Well, Sam, thank you so much. That is a fascinating bit of history here for your church and for our county. And we would like to do a question and answer session here. And so for those of you that have been watching, if you have questions that you would like to for us to field over to Sam, you can use the question and answer function. It may be at the top or the bottom of your screen, depending on what device you have. But feel free to send those over to us, and we'll try to get to them if we have time. I'm going to turn it over to Dick McCoy for the question and answer session with Sam. Thanks, Dick.
Good. Thank you, CC, and thank you, Sam. Just absolutely fascinating story, particularly in our current times with our own racial reckoning. So this is good for us to know. Let's review the two poll questions. You answered them through the talk, but some people maybe came in late. The first one was in 1954, the session of Allison Creek Presbyterian Church voted to, and there were four choices: admit women into leadership. Second one, be a segregated congregation. Third, be an integrated congregation. And D, build a new sanctuary. And as you mentioned early in the talk, they voted to be a segregated congregation.
That is correct.
The second poll question was, how many acres did Hill's Ironworks purchase to produce military armaments during the Revolutionary War? And the choices were 5,000 up to 25,000 acres. And the correct answer was 25,000 acres. Huge area. So we've gotten some great questions, Sam. What about, are the balcony pews still slanted forward, and does that keep parishioners awake during sermons?
So whenever we have folks out here, I love to show the pews, and I point out that there are slats on the bottom of the pews, and so somewhere along the lines, the folks at Allison Creek got tired of sitting in pews that were slanting down, and so they put these slats in to balance out the pews.
Okay, good.
But yes, they were, the pews were built with a downward slant so that if you fell asleep in worship, you would slide out of the front of the pew.
Okay. Good to know.
True story.
True story. That's great. Can you tell us more about the slaves section of your church? I'm assuming the member is talking about inside the sanctuary and maybe the grounds.
So the sanctuary, which is still the sanctuary which we use. So the balcony is present. We still use that. We actually we replaced the pews on the bottom level, but the pews in the balcony are the original pews. And then there are some other places where we have original pews as well, located around the church building. And so when you go up in the balcony, you have a chance to sit in those pews, which were built by enslaved African Americans and from wood, pine wood from this property. And so those pews have been restored, and so they are very attractive, I think, pews to sit in and to feel the spirituality of being in those pews in that balcony. And and I hope that also sitting in those pews in that balcony helps us to understand where we have been as a congregation and where we are now as a congregation, which is obviously not an exclusive whites only body of believers.
Right.
The other thing I wanted to point out, I'm wearing a Liberian shirt, so if everybody can see that. I was blessed on our trip to get some great, cool Liberian clothes, which whenever I wear these out in public, I usually get comments about it, which allows me to then tell this story.
Good. I can't quite see it. I see the top. So is it a vest or okay?
It's a shirt.
Gotcha. Great. Thank you. Okay. Here's why did Elias Hill actually flee to Liberia? You talked a little bit about it, but expand on that.
Right. So he felt like it was impossible. He was beaten almost to death. And I think he was very disappointed by the white landowners around him. And he felt like he could not trust anybody anymore, that these white landowners had made a pact. They met out in a public crossroads out here somewhere nearby, and Elias and the other white landowners, and they said, we got your back, we got you covered. And in fact, it turns out the majority of white men in York County were members of the Klan. I'm gonna show you something in just a second.
Okay.
So one of the things that after someone heard me telling this story, they were able to invite me over to their place and to provide me with a couple of robes that were formerly located in a store in Rock Hill, in one of the upstairs areas of Rock Hill. And so if you can see, I'm wearing a robe. This is a robe, and you should recognize what this symbol is. So I have in my possession 2 Klan robes that were used by Klansmen here in York County, where they would meet in one of the storefronts in downtown Rock Hill.
Okay.
Here's a hood, which I am not putting on. I can assure you of that.
Yeah.
And to be in possession of these robes, which, that to me is an embodiment of evil, and lets you see in a real tangible way of what evil looks like.
Yes. Sam, expand about where those were. You said they were found in downtown Rock Hill. Do you know any more details?
Oh shoot, I'm blanking on his name. I noticed Terry Plum put in there.
Yeah.
They came into my possession by Terry, who's a photographer in Rock Hill, has his studio on Main Street. Oh shoot, I'm blanking.
Oh, Terry
Roosh. Terry Roosh. Yes. Yeah, Terry was able to give me those 2 robes.
Okay. Well, good. Let's see. Okay. Well, you had mentioned about how the session in 1954 made their justification. And so what is the biblical justification for slavery in the South? And then the second part was, wasn't the real justification economic?
Well, you know, the justification is, you know, biblically, there are scriptures where, you know, slaves be obedient to your masters, and of course, I interpret that to be, you know, situations that were indicative of the day and of Paul not wanting to change the system because he thought Jesus was coming any day. So Henry Thornwell, who there's a what used to be an orphanage and now it's something else in Clinton, South Carolina. Thornwell was this leading pastor in the Southern Presbyterian Church, and so he wrote the document that led to the succession of the Southern Presbyterian Church. And that document, it's a pretty lengthy document, but it gives all of the biblical support for Southern Presbyterians to leave and defend slavery. And so, yes, you know, economics and theology can very much be tied together, where for their own economic interests, people can read the Bible in such a way to support, you know, economic oppression. I mean, you know, folks today read the Bible to support and defend economic inequality in our culture today, and you know,
Right.
which I think is antithetical to the biblical story. But many folks justify those inequalities by citing biblical sources.
Yes. Let's see. Okay, here. What are your hours for worship and Bible studies now?
So worship is on Sunday mornings at 10 o'clock. We have just gone inside our Family Life Center. We've been outside ever since the beginning of the pandemic. And so we're one of the churches that take that very seriously. And so we mask and socially distance, and we are open to all. And so that's our main gathering time is that 10 o'clock Sunday morning worship. The other studies and stuff is Zoom related kind of stuff. So, but you know, feel free. You can contact me through our website. I will be on vacation next week, and one of the people in that picture, Patrice Gaines, who herself an incredible author, is going to be leading worship here on November the 1st. But we are a congregation that welcomes all. We are integrated, and so we would love to have folks join us for worship, either in present, or we do post all of our services, or they are all online through our YouTube channel.
Good. There are just a couple of comments here. One member says, your church is an integrated congregation now. Congratulations to your members for all they continue to do for the community. A member also says, thank you for an absolutely fascinating story. Let's see, one last question.
I see someone asked Rufus or Lucas. It's Rufus.
Rufus.
R-U-F-U-S, I think.
Okay, good. How have slave control methods implemented in Liberia affected their country today?
Well, it wasn't enslavement as it was a hierarchical system. And so, you know, visiting Liberia today, it's fascinating because you meet folks who have, you know, traditional African names, and then you meet people who introduce themselves as Winchester Johnson. And that's a name that stuck out at me of not what I expected. Up until their current president, all of their leadership were descendants of Americo-Liberians, and Fortunately, Liberia went through a very nasty civil war back in the 80s and 90s under the dictatorship of Charles Taylor, who was actually a resident, grew up in Arlington, where the folks from this area settled in. And Charles Taylor was somebody who was Christian, who was actively supported by a lot of Christians from the US. He was constantly on Pat Robertson's show, but he was also a ruthless dictator. And so there's been this hierarchy set up where the advantages have been to descendants of Americo-Liberians versus descendants of Native Africans. But their current president is descended from Native Africans, although that's been a real disaster for Liberia.
Okay, so quite complicated too.
Yes.
Well, good. Well, thank you so much, Sam. Such a revealing story. Appreciate you sharing this with us. So next week, we have another fascinating class. It's called You Take the Wheel, an auto buying insight class. Josh Gaines and Johnny Elmore from Family Trust Credit Union will be speaking with us. Josh began working at Family Trust in 2011. He's a Winthrop graduate. Johnny Elmore has a long history career in auto dealerships. So worked many years for various dealerships. So he understands that side of the story. He's been with Family Trust since 2018 as their indirect lending manager. So he kind of serves as a coach, a go-between for the Family Trust members when they are needing to buy a car. So as Josh and Johnny said, this is not going to be your average trip to the store. It's time to buy that new car, and you already have so many questions, such as, where do you even begin? What model do you want? What year? What color? How many miles is too many miles? Should I get a warranty? What about insurance? What do all of these fees mean? I think we've all been down that road. Can I get a better deal, and how? What does this interest rate really mean? So join us next week when Josh Gaines and Johnny Elmore fill us in on all this information. So again, thank you all for being with us this week. Once again, tell your friends about us and encourage them to join us for the remaining 3 sessions. So thanks again and have a great day.
And I would like to let you know that Professor Katerina Moyan has agreed to lead a discussion of the girl with 7 names for our members on Wednesday, November 18th at 2 o'clock. This discussion will be limited to 20 members and will take place via Zoom platform. Participants will be able to be seen and heard and will enjoy about an hour's discussion of the book with Professor Moyan. In the e-bulletin that you will receive this afternoon, there will be a register here link to sign up for the book discussion. You can download the book for free on Amazon and can read it on your Kindle app. We hope you've enjoyed today's session and we look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you so much.